After 15 years of renting cramped apartments in the city, I finally saved enough for a down payment on my dream home. The Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood stood as a picture of suburban perfection: manicured lawns, well-maintained homes, and tree-lined streets where children played freely on weekends. I remember the first time I drove through those neighborhood gates, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over me. This was not just a house. This was the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. The moving process went smoothly despite the summer heat. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day to introduce themselves, bringing small welcome gifts and friendly smiles. The Johnsons from across the street brought a homemade apple pie. The elderly couple next door, the Williamses, offered to help carry boxes. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased to have a new addition to their community. During that first week, I received a welcome packet from the Homeowners Association. The rules seemed reasonable enough: guidelines about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, holiday decorations, and noise restrictions. Nothing that concerned me. I had heard horror stories about tyrannical HOAs, but Oak Ridge Estates appeared to operate with common sense. The monthly fee seemed fair for the amenities provided: a community pool, playground, and regular landscape maintenance of common areas. 2 weeks after moving in, I decided to host a small gathering to thank my friends who had helped with the move. The backyard proved perfect for entertaining, spacious with a wooden deck, a small garden area, and plenty of room for a grill. That evening went flawlessly. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, drank cold beer, and enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere of my new neighborhood. Several neighbors stopped by briefly to say hello, accepting a plate of food and chatting amiably before returning to their homes. One such neighbor was Karen Wilson. She lived in the house directly behind mine, our properties separated by a 6-foot wooden fence. Karen appeared friendly enough at first glance, a woman in her mid-40s with short blonde hair and a perpetual look of mild concern on her face. She declined food but accepted a glass of lemonade, commenting on how lovely the yard looked. She asked several questions about my plans for the space, nodding politely at my responses. Only in retrospect did I recognize the tightness in her smile when I mentioned my plans to upgrade my outdoor cooking space. The successful gathering sparked something in me. I had always enjoyed cooking, but had never had the space to explore outdoor grilling properly. With my new backyard, I decided to invest in a hobby I had long admired: barbecue smoking. After extensive research, I purchased a premium offset smoker, spending nearly $2,000 on what I considered an investment in many future meals and gatherings. The first time I fired up the smoker felt like a special occasion. I selected a beautiful brisket from a local butcher and devoted an entire Saturday to the low and slow cooking process. The rich aroma of hickory smoke and seasoned meat filled my backyard, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction watching thin blue smoke curl upward into the sky. I noticed Karen peering over the fence briefly, but thought nothing of it at the time. Over the next few weeks, I developed a true passion for smoking meats. Each weekend became an opportunity to try new recipes: ribs, pork shoulder, chicken, even attempting to smoke a turkey once. My closest friends became regular visitors, eager to sample my latest creations. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, I decided to host a larger weekend barbecue, inviting not only friends but also neighbors. I distributed invitations throughout the neighborhood, excited to share my newfound hobby with the community. Little did I know, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon of my suburban paradise. The weekend gathering was in full swing by early afternoon. Nearly 20 people filled my backyard, enjoying the sunny weather and the aroma of smoked brisket and ribs that had been cooking since dawn. Children played tag across the lawn while adults chatted in small groups, paper plates loaded with food. The atmosphere buzzed with friendly conversation and laughter. Then came the sharp, insistent knocking at my side gate. I opened the gate to find Karen standing there, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face appeared flushed, eyes narrowed with clear irritation. The pleasant smile I had seen during our first meeting was nowhere in sight. "You need to turn that smoker off immediately," she demanded, pointing at my prized cooker. "The smoke is blowing directly into my house. It is assaulting my senses and promoting animal cruelty right in our neighborhood." Taken aback by her directness, I attempted diplomacy. "I am sorry about the smoke, Karen. The wind must have shifted. I can try repositioning the smoker to direct it away from your property." "That is not good enough," she replied, her voice rising. "This type of cooking should not be allowed in residential areas at all. Do you have any idea what that smell does to someone who respects animal life?" Before I could respond, she turned and stormed away, leaving me standing awkwardly at the gate with several of my guests looking on curiously. I returned to the party, attempting to maintain the festive mood, but Karen's confrontation cast a shadow over the remainder of the afternoon. In the days that followed, I noticed Karen engaged in animated conversations with other neighbors, frequently gesturing toward my property. When I would wave or attempt to make friendly contact, she would abruptly end her conversation and retreat inside her home. The previously warm environment of the neighborhood began to feel slightly chilled, at least in my immediate vicinity. Exactly 9 days after the barbecue, an official letter arrived from the Homeowners Association. The envelope bore the Oak Ridge Estates emblem, and inside was a formal notice citing community disturbance and air quality concerns regarding my weekend cooking activities. The letter referenced complaints from multiple residents and requested that I remedy the situation promptly. Confused and concerned, I spent that evening reviewing the HOA covenant line by line. Armed with a highlighter and sticky notes, I carefully analyzed every rule and restriction. As I suspected, there were no specific prohibitions against outdoor cooking or smokers. The only relevant sections referenced excessive noise and noxious odors, both subjective terms that could not reasonably apply to occasional weekend barbecues. The following Saturday morning, I was enjoying coffee on my patio when movement caught my eye. Karen was leaning over our shared fence, a smartphone in hand, clearly taking photographs of my backyard and smoker. Instinctively, I stood and approached the fence. "Karen, may I ask what you are doing?" I called out, keeping my tone measured despite my growing frustration. She jumped slightly, apparently not expecting to be caught. Rather than appearing embarrassed, however, she seemed emboldened. "I am documenting the environmental hazard you have introduced to our community," she replied coldly. "Do you have any idea how many animals died to satisfy your selfish appetite?" "Karen, I understand you have different dietary preferences, but photographing my private property crosses a line," I said firmly. "This is not about preferences," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is about murder. Every piece of meat you cook represents a sentient being that wanted to live. The smoke you produce celebrates death and torture." I stood stunned as Karen launched into a tirade about animal rights, factory farming, and the moral bankruptcy of meat consumption. This was clearly not about smoke or odors or HOA regulations. Karen was a militant animal rights activist who viewed my barbecue hobby as a personal affront to her deeply held beliefs. As she finally ran out of steam and retreated to her house, I noticed for the first time the posters visible through her windows, graphic images of factory farms and slogans about animal liberation. The HOA complaint suddenly made much more sense. This was not a dispute about neighborhood rules. This was ideological warfare, and my backyard had become the battlefield. Hopping to defuse the situation, I made several genuine attempts at compromise. First, I adjusted my cooking schedule to weekdays when Karen was likely at work. Then I repositioned the smoker to the far corner of my yard, maximizing the distance from her property. I even invested in a smoke diverter attachment designed to minimize the spread of smoke. Despite these efforts, Karen remained unmoved and increasingly hostile. One morning, I found a note taped to my front door. "No amount of adjustment makes animal murder acceptable. Stop completely." The handwriting matched the signature Karen had used on the neighborhood welcome card during my first week. The direct demand to cease all meat cooking confirmed what I already suspected. Nothing short of complete capitulation would satisfy her. The monthly HOA meeting arrived, and I decided to attend, hoping to address the complaints directly and clarify that my activities violated no bylaws. The community center room was already half full when I arrived. Karen sat near the front, surrounded by 3 board members who leaned in as she spoke animatedly. When she noticed me entering, she immediately fell silent and the small group dispersed to their official seats. Board President Richard Henderson called the meeting to order with standard agenda items. When the floor opened for resident concerns, Karen immediately raised her hand. What followed was a dramatic performance worthy of a courtroom drama. For months now, our peaceful community has been polluted with toxic fumes and the celebration of animal slaughter, she began, her voice quavering with practiced emotion. Children walk past displays of animal corpses being burned. The smoke contains carcinogens that threaten our health. Our neighborhood has become a slaughterhouse district. The board members who had been huddled with Karen earlier nodded along sympathetically. Other residents looked confused or uncomfortable. Fortunately, I had come prepared with allies. 5 neighbors, including the Johnsons and Williamses, had agreed to speak on my behalf, having enjoyed my cooking and recognizing the unreasonable nature of the complaints. Mark Johnson spoke first after Karen finished. I live across from the property in question, and I can say the occasional barbecue smoke is minimal and actually quite pleasant. This seems like a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate community concern. The meeting continued with neighbors speaking for both sides, though it became clear that most residents saw the complaint as overblown. The board, however, seemed reluctant to dismiss Karen's concerns entirely, suggesting they would look into the matter further before making any decisions. We ended at an uncomfortable stalemate. The following morning brought a disturbing escalation. My mailbox and front porch were littered with graphic pamphlets depicting slaughterhouse scenes and statistics about animal suffering. The images were deliberately shocking, bloody and explicit, clearly meant to disturb and intimidate rather than educate. Some pamphlets had been pushed through my mail slot, meaning someone had approached my front door during the night. The invasion of my property crossed a line. That afternoon, I purchased and installed security cameras covering my front porch, backyard, and the areas along my fence line. The installation took several hours, but by evening my property was under continuous monitoring, footage backing up to cloud storage I could access from my phone. The investment proved worthwhile almost immediately. At 5:47 the next morning, my phone alerted me to movement in the backyard. The footage showed Karen carefully scaling the fence, dropping into my yard and approaching my patio. She examined my smoker closely, took several photographs, and then peered through my back windows before climbing back over the fence. I watched the entire trespass, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Over the next week, the cameras captured Karen entering my property 3 more times, always in the early morning hours before dawn. During one visit, she appeared to be measuring dimensions around my patio. During another, she left more pamphlets tucked under my grill cover. The systematic invasion of my space left me feeling violated and increasingly concerned about her intentions. Then came the note that transformed concern into genuine fear. Slipped under my front door in a plain white envelope, the message was typed rather than handwritten. Those who participate in animal murder will face justice. Your smoke signals will soon be answered with fire. The threatening language and mention of fire sent a chill through me. This was no longer a neighborly dispute or even zealous activism. This was a direct threat to my safety and property. I reread the note several times, contemplating my next steps carefully. While I valued standing my ground, I also recognized the situation was spiraling into potentially dangerous territory. That night, I backed up all security footage to an external drive and compiled a record of every interaction with Karen, every HOA communication, and photographs of the threatening materials left on my property. The methodical documentation helped calm my nerves, but sleep remained elusive as I contemplated what justice and fire might mean to someone whose ideology had clearly radicalized them beyond reason. The smoke Karen so vehemently opposed seemed to hang metaphorically in the air between our homes, a harbinger of conflict that was about to erupt into something far more dangerous than either of us had anticipated. Despite the escalating tension, I refused to be intimidated out of enjoying my home. The local fire station had recently lost funding for their annual Community Appreciation Day, so I volunteered to host a charity barbecue to benefit the firefighters. The event had been properly permitted with the city and announced in the community newsletter. Many neighbors expressed enthusiasm about supporting our first responders, and several volunteered to help with preparations. The morning of the charity event arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze. I began cooking at dawn, preparing to feed approximately 50 people, including firefighters and their families. By mid-morning, tables were set up across my lawn, decorated with red, white, and blue streamers. A donation box sat near the entrance, already containing several generous contributions. As the first guests began to arrive, a commotion at the end of my driveway drew attention. Karen had assembled a small group of 5 protesters, all holding large signs with graphic images of slaughtered animals and slogans like "meat is murder" and "barbecue equals death." They positioned themselves strategically so that anyone attending would have to walk past their disturbing display. Fire Chief Rodriguez arrived and approached me with concern. "Is this going to be a problem?" he asked, gesturing toward the protesters. "They are on public property," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "As long as they stay there, they have the right to express their views. Please do not let it detract from what we are doing for your department." Despite the unwelcome demonstration, the event proceeded successfully. Most attendees simply walked past the protesters with uncomfortable glances. The firefighters expressed tremendous gratitude for the meal and community support, and we raised over $3,000 for new equipment. As the afternoon wound down, Karen and her group eventually dispersed, their attempt to disrupt the charity event largely unsuccessful. The following day, another official HOA warning arrived by certified mail. This one cited continued disregard for neighborhood harmony and organized activities causing disruption. The letter contained no specific bylaw violations, but implied that further actions could result in fines. The timing made it clear this was retaliation for proceeding with the fundraiser despite Karen's objections. 3 days later, while shopping at the local grocery store, I experienced how far Karen was willing to take her campaign. As I selected steaks from the meat department, her voice rang out loudly behind me. "Do you know what you are purchasing?" she announced to everyone within earshot. "Those packages contain tortured animal corpses. This man cooks dead animals in our neighborhood, polluting our air with the smoke of suffering." Other shoppers stared uncomfortably as I tried to continue my shopping, Karen following several steps behind, continuing her public shamming attempt. Store management eventually intervened, asking her to stop disrupting other customers. She left the store, but not before warning me that consequences were coming. That evening, reviewing my security footage from the previous night, I discovered something truly alarming. The video clearly showed Karen entering my backyard at 2:14 a.m., approaching my grill and smoker area. She produced a small bottle from her pocket and poured an unidentified liquid onto my grill grates before carefully replacing the cover and departing. The deliberate tampering with equipment I used for food preparation crossed yet another dangerous line. The next morning, I took the footage to the local police station and filed a formal report for trespassing and property damage. The officer watched the video with concern, but cautioned me about expectations. "This is clearly trespassing," Officer Martinez confirmed. "And tampering with your cooking equipment is concerning. We will send someone to speak with her about this incident." Unfortunately, without knowing exactly what substance was used, and without physical injury occurring, this likely falls under lower priority offenses. I left the station with a copy of the report but little confidence that a conversation with police would deter Karen's escalating behavior. As a precaution, I thoroughly cleaned and sanitized my entire outdoor cooking area and changed the locks on my gate. 3 nights later came the moment that would transform this neighborhood dispute into a criminal case. I was preparing a simple dinner on my patio, just a few chicken breasts on the grill, nothing that produced significant smoke. The spring evening was peaceful, the setting sun casting long shadows across my yard. From somewhere beyond my fence came the sound of breaking branches and hushed movement. Before I could investigate, an object arced high over my fence, a glass bottle with a flaming rag stuffed in its neck. The homemade Molotov cocktail crashed against my smoker with a shattering explosion, instantly engulfing it in flames that quickly spread to nearby patio furniture. The fire crawled up the wooden table legs and threatened the overhead pergola. Through gaps in the fence panels, I could see Karen standing in her yard, watching the flames with an expression of righteous satisfaction. "Justice for animals," she shouted when she noticed me looking. "Now you know they're suffering." I ran for the garden hose, frantically unwinding it while dialing 911 on my phone. Neighbors emerged from their homes, alerted by the commotion and growing flames. 2 men from across the street grabbed their own hoses and rushed to help contain the fire before it could spread to the house. The fire department arrived within minutes, quickly extinguishing the remaining flames. As firefighters secured the scene, police officers appeared at Karen's door. This time, with multiple witnesses and obvious property damage, they placed her in handcuffs and led her to a patrol car. Her continued shouts about animal liberation echoed down the street as neighbors watched in shocked silence. I stood in my smoke-damaged backyard, surveying the destruction, my expensive smoker destroyed, patio furniture charred, and decks scorched. Beyond the physical damage lay something more profound, the violation of safety in my own home. What had begun as a neighborhood dispute over cooking odors had escalated to arson and assault. As police officers took my statement, I realized this conflict had moved far beyond HOA bylaws and neighbor disagreements. This was now a criminal matter, and there would be no going back to polite coexistence. Emergency vehicles transformed our quiet suburban street into a chaotic scene of flashing lights and urgent activity. Firefighters ensured no embers remained that could reignite, while police officers established a perimeter around my property with yellow caution tape. Neighbors gathered in small clusters on the sidewalk, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Detective Wilson arrived to take my formal statement, photographing the damage and collecting the remains of the glass bottle as evidence. "We are treating this as arson and assault," he explained as he documented the scene. "The suspect is already in custody. She has not stopped talking about her reasons since officers arrived, which makes our job easier from an evidence standpoint." As the detective continued his work, a neighbor approached me, Michael from 3 houses down, who served as the HOA treasurer. "I feel I should tell you," he said quietly, "this is not Karen's first brush with the law. After she moved in last year, I ran a standard background check, as we do with all new homeowners. She has prior arrests for breaking into a butcher shop in Phoenix and vandalizing a meat processing facility in Colorado. The board was assured these were isolated incidents in her past." This revelation stunned me. The HOA had known about Karen's history of extremist activities, yet had taken her side against me throughout our dispute. The implications were troubling and raised serious questions about the board's judgment and potential liability. The following morning, my phone rang with a notification of an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for that evening to address the recent unfortunate incident. The tone of the email suggested a dramatic shift from previous communications, with expressions of concern for my well-being and property. Concerns notably absent when Karen was merely threatening rather than acting on her extremism. The community center meeting room was packed that evening. Board President Henderson called the meeting to order with a noticeably different demeanor than at previous gatherings. Gone was the sympathetic ear he had lent to Karen's complaints, replaced by a solemn expression of institutional concern. "We are deeply troubled by the violent incident that occurred in our community," he began. "This board wants to express its strongest condemnation of such actions and its support for the affected homeowner." The sudden pivot to support rang hollow after months of enabling Karen's escalating behavior. When Henderson suggested that perhaps everyone could move forward without involving courts, the true purpose of the meeting became clear. This was not about supporting me, but about limiting HOA liability. "We believe the actions of the individual do not reflect our community values," Henderson continued, "and we hope this matter can be resolved quickly and quietly, without the need for protracted legal proceedings that could negatively impact our neighborhood's reputation and property values." Several board members nodded in agreement, their expressions conveying their hope that I would be reasonable and allow this matter to fade away. The unspoken suggestion that I should decline to press charges left me speechless with disbelief. Later that night, unable to sleep in my smoke-damaged home, I began researching Karen's online presence. What I discovered was chilling. Her social media accounts and blog posts revealed a deeply radicalized individual who had been escalating her activism for years. She regularly encouraged followers to take direct action against animal killers and shared techniques for creating pressure against meat eaters in their homes and communities. Most disturbing were posts from just weeks earlier, where she specifically mentioned a neighbor who celebrates animal death with smoke signals and promised her followers she would make him stop one way or another. The premeditation was clear and documented in her own words. The pressure to drop the case intensified over the following days. Neighbors I had considered friends suggested I should be the bigger person and consider how a trial would affect community harmony. The HOA attorney called, offering to cover the cost of my damaged property if I would consider alternative resolution approaches. Even local animal rights groups sent representatives to my door, suggesting that pursuing charges would make me appear vindictive and turn public opinion against me. The final attempt at persuasion came from Henderson himself, who visited my home with a fruit basket and concerned expression. "We all want peace in our community," he said after exchanging pleasantries. "Karen has agreed to move away if you drop the charges. The HOA will ensure she sells her house immediately. Would not that solution be better for everyone?" Standing in my backyard, looking at the charred remains of my smoker and the scorched wood of my deck, I made my decision. The attempts to sweep this violence under the rug revealed a troubling pattern. Community leaders more concerned with appearances than justice, neighbors more invested in comfort than confronting extremism, and a system that would allow this behavior to continue elsewhere if not addressed now. I picked up my phone and called the attorney whose card Detective Wilson had left me, a specialist in property rights and harassment cases. "I want to pursue this case to its fullest extent," I told her when she answered, "both against Karen and potentially against the HOA that enabled her despite knowing her history. There would be no quiet resolution, no sweeping this under the rug. Someone had attempted to burn down my home over a barbecue, and accountability was the only path forward." The county courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky as I arrived with my attorney, Patricia Martinez, a specialist in property rights who had taken my case immediately after viewing the security footage. "This is one of the clearest cases of escalating harassment leading to violence I have seen," she had commented during our first meeting. "The documentation you provided gives us a strong position." Inside the courtroom, Karen sat with her public defender, her previously righteous demeanor replaced with a subdued expression. More surprising was the presence of HOA Board President Henderson, seated directly behind Karen, leaning forward occasionally to whisper encouragement. His presence confirmed my suspicions about the biased handling of our dispute from the beginning. While my criminal case against Karen proceeded through the legal system, the HOA board attempted to quietly pass new bylaws restricting outdoor cooking hours and equipment. The proposed rules would effectively prohibit smokers and limit grilling to 2 hours between 5:00 p.m. and 7:00 p.m. on weekdays only. The transparent attempt to retroactively justify their position backfired spectacularly. Chief Rodriguez, whose department had benefited from my charity event, learned of the proposed restrictions and mobilized concerned neighbors. A coalition formed quickly, with over 40 homeowners signing a petition against the new rules. Many expressed outrage that the board would focus on restricting legitimate homeowner activities rather than addressing how they had enabled dangerous extremism. The preliminary hearing began with the prosecution presenting the extensive evidence I had documented. The security footage played on courtroom monitors, clearly showing Karen's escalating trespassing, tampering, and finally, the shocking Molotov cocktail attack. Photos of my damaged property and police reports created a timeline of harassment that had culminated in violence. Karen's defense attorney portrayed her as a passionate activist driven to desperation by what he termed olfactory assault and moral injury from my cooking activities. My client deeply regrets her actions, he argued, but asks the court to consider the psychological distress caused by constant reminders of what she considers animal cruelty. The case took an unexpected turn when my attorney submitted a discovery request for all HOA communications regarding my dispute with Karen. The HOA attorney fought vigorously against this motion, but was overruled by the judge. What emerged was damning. Emails between Henderson and Karen revealed they were cousins, explaining the board's consistent bias throughout our conflict. Additional documents showed the board had been advised by their legal counsel to address Karen's behavior months earlier, but had chosen not to act. The HOA had prioritized family connection over resident safety, despite documented evidence of escalating threats. This revelation transformed the case from a dispute between neighbors into a story of institutional failure and nepotism. When called to testify, I focused not on the destroyed equipment but on the psychological impact of the harassment campaign. I no longer feel safe in my own backyard, I explained to the court. What should be my sanctuary became a place of fear and vigilance. I installed cameras not for security but out of necessity. I check under my grill for tampering before each use. I look over my shoulder in grocery stores. The damage extends far beyond property. Karen's testimony revealed her unrepentant perspective, despite her lawyer's attempts to portray remorse. When asked if she understood the potential consequences of throwing a flaming object onto someone's property, she replied, "I understood I was taking necessary action against animal cruelty. Sometimes justice requires dramatic measures." After 3 days of testimony, the judge delivered a clear verdict. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts, including arson, criminal trespass, and reckless endangerment. Her prior arrests served as aggravating factors in sentencing. As the judge announced a 3-year prison term followed by mandatory psychiatric evaluation and permanent restraining orders, Karen's righteous expression crumbled into the reality of consequences. Henderson hurried from the courtroom, avoiding reporters and angry neighbors who had attended the proceedings. His hasty exit marked the beginning of accountability that would soon extend beyond Karen to the institutional failures that had enabled her. As my attorney and I exited the courthouse steps, she turned to me with a satisfied nod. "Phase 1 complete," she said. "Now we address the HOA's liability. Their negligence and nepotism created the conditions for this to happen." Autumn leaves had replaced summer blooms by the time justice completed its course. Karen began serving her 3-year sentence, with court-mandated psychiatric treatment as part of her rehabilitation. The HOA faced its own reckoning as outraged neighbors initiated a recall election, removing Henderson and 3 board members who had concealed their conflicts of interest and enabled destructive behavior. My civil suit against the Homeowners Association resulted in a substantial settlement. Their insurance company, recognizing the clear liability created by documented negligence and nepotism, chose to settle rather than risk a larger jury award. The funds provided more than enough to repair the fire damage and replace my destroyed equipment. Standing in my reconstructed backyard, I surveyed the transformation. The charred deck had been replaced with an expanded concrete patio. The damaged section of fence was now a beautiful stone wall. Most importantly, where my destroyed smoker once stood now sat a complete outdoor kitchen, designed with both beauty and safety in mind. Fire-resistant materials, proper ventilation, and subtle security features ensured this space would remain safe and welcoming. The inaugural neighborhood barbecue represented more than just a meal. It symbolized our community reclaiming its right to reasonable enjoyment of private property. Nearly 60 neighbors attended, including many who had previously remained silent during my ordeal. The former board members who had pressured me to drop charges were notably absent, their influence in the community diminished by their revealed bias and poor judgment. A new HOA committee had formed, committed to fair rule enforcement and transparent governance. Their first official act had been to clearly define reasonable guidelines for outdoor cooking that protected both property rights and community standards. The balanced approach acknowledged different lifestyles while establishing clear boundaries for legitimate complaints. As twilight settled over the gathering, I took a moment alone by the fire pit, watching flames that now represented warmth and community rather than destruction and conflict. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing firm against extremism, documenting everything, and recognizing when to seek help from proper authorities rather than ineffective or compromised institutions. "Quite a difference from last summer," observed Chief Rodriguez, joining me by the fire with a plate of brisket. "You know, what you did here goes beyond just winning a case. You showed everyone that bullies do not get to dictate how we live, no matter how righteous they claim their cause to be." The evening progressed with neighbors lingering around the fire pit, children playing on the lawn, and the gentle aroma of smoked meats drifting through the air, no longer a source of conflict, but a symbol of resilience and restored harmony. Conversations flowed easily, with many expressing appreciation for the stand I had taken against both individual extremism and institutional enabling. As the last guests departed under a canopy of stars, I realized that sometimes, fighting for what is right changes more than just one's own circumstances. It can transform an entire community. My neighborhood had evolved from a place where extremism was tolerated to one where reasonable people could peacefully coexist despite differences. The HOA had transformed from an entity that played favorites to one that served the entire community fairly. The evening breeze carried the fatting scent of hickory smoke across my yard as I closed the cover on my new smoker. Tomorrow would bring another day of peaceful enjoyment of my home and property. The battle had been difficult and at times frightening, but the outcome had been worth every moment of struggle. In standing up for my simple right to barbecue in my own backyard, I had helped establish something much more valuable: a community founded on respect, reasonable boundaries, and the courage to confront those who would impose their extremism on others.